Hi, everybody. This is David Turnquist, a licensed real estate broker in Texas, actually in Houston. And in today's video tutorial, we're going to go over the Texas Residential Listing Agreement. That's Form TXR 1101. So let's get started. TXR 1101 is used by real estate agents in Texas to list residential properties. So paragraph one, there's no changes here. Before I get started, paragraph 5 is where the real change on the form came in 2024. This form was updated in June of 2024, right before all the mandatory changes went in August because of the NAR lawsuit. So most of this stuff is all going to be the same as the previous version of this form, except mainly when we get to paragraph 5. All right, so let's look at paragraph 1. This is where you're going to put the names of your client, the seller. So in this example, we have Sheldon Sellerson and Serena Sellerson. Now it has their address as 5389 Maple Street, and you'll notice that that address in paragraph 1 also matches the address of the property in paragraph 2, which is the legal description of the property. But what if the owners had already moved and no longer live in this home? In paragraph 1, you would put their current address, but in paragraph 2, you would put the address of the property you're listing. So paragraph 2 is very important that you have the actual address of the property that you're listing and going to be marketing. Paragraph 1 is where the sellers live now. So, a lot of times they will be living in the home still, but sometimes they will have already moved. So make sure that you have their current address and contact information. Now, below that is the name of the brokerage that you work for. So you'll have the name of your brokerage, the address and where it's located, and then where it has phone and email. That's where you're going to put your phone and email. Unless your broker specifically tells you that you have to put their phone and email there, you can put yours. And the reason for that is you're the one that's going to be dealing with these people, not your broker. And in some brokerages, they have hundreds of agents. They're not even going to see this form, nor they don't know these people. So they need to know how to get a hold of you. So do go ahead and do that unless your broker tells you otherwise. And there's also a place for 2 emails, so you could put your broker's email here on the left and your email here on the right. And you can put 2 phone numbers in here as well. All right, in paragraph 2, you need to put the legal description. You can get that from the tax website or other sources, but make sure you have everything on there. In this case, it's lot 9, block 13 of Deer Meadows Estates. Okay, there's an error here. Sometimes even I make a mistake. There should be a city here. I didn't put it in this sample, but let's just say City of Houston in Harris County. And then the known as is where you put the informal address. You got the legal description here in the first part of paragraph 2, and then you have the informal address, which is the street address. So in this case, 5839 Maple Street. And then you need the zip code. So sometimes you can type it in and it'll all fit right here on this top line, and sometimes it'll spill over to this second line here. But make sure you have the street address and the zip code. Okay, in paragraphs 2B and C, if you're not familiar with this, if you're a new agent, you may want to read through this several times and memorize what is considered a fixture and what stays with the property and what does not. Also, if you're coming here from another state, different states have different rules about what stays with the home and what does not. In other words, what conveys with the sale. I've had people come from other states here and they go, oh, well, we left our refrigerator or we took our refrigerator, whatever. And I'm like, well, here's the rules in Texas. Let me go over them with you. So I usually go over this with the seller to make sure that they understand what they can take and what they can't take. So they're listed here in paragraphs 2B and C. 3 of the biggest questions are always, what about the refrigerator? Well, in Texas, the refrigerator is considered personal property and it does not stay. The seller can keep it and take it with them. Now, they don't have to, they can always leave it, but then there'll be another form called a non-realty item disclosure. The washer and dryer are also considered personal property, and they would go with the seller. Of course, the seller can leave them as well. But anytime you're going to leave something that's not supposed to be left there, you need to make sure that the other agent and the buyer are aware of that. They may not want you to leave it there. Don't do them any favors if they don't want them. I don't want your crappy refrigerator. I don't want your old couch. So don't leave something unless you have cleared it with the buyer and their agent first. Now the stove has to stay. You would say, yeah, but I bought the stove at Home Depot that slides in and out. Yes, it does. However, in paragraph 2C, it specifically says that the stove has to stay. So there's no question there, the stove stays. I have had clients that wanted to, keep their stove, and I said, well, if you're going to do that, then go ahead and get another stove and switch it out, because you can't sell the house without it. Unless you're going to show the house with no stove in it. So I've had people switch out dishwashers, ceiling fans, those types of things. Personally, I think the seller should go ahead and replace items that they're going to take with them that they're not supposed to take, like ceiling fans and dishwashers, stoves, things like that. But you don't have to. Now, how do you get away with taking something that was supposed to stay? You put it in paragraph 2D, which is called exclusions. As a listing agent, it's very important that you speak to your seller when you're listing the home and say, is there anything on this list, that you plan on taking with you? Very often there are some things like the ones listed here in paragraph 2D on this sample. And it says all TV mounts. TV mounts are considered fixtures because they're bolted into the wall. And you may say, yeah, but that mount goes with that TV, so I want it. Okay. But if you're going to take the TV mount, you have to disclose that up front. You can't just take it and say, well, they'll never know. Same thing goes for the Ring doorbell. The Ring doorbell is mounted to the door outside. And even though it may be your property, you have to tell them you're taking it if you plan on taking it. The best thing is really just to go buy a new one. Take it with you to your new house. Also, the same thing goes for security systems. If you have a security system in your house, you want to take it with you. Most of that stuff is mounted up onto the walls where the cameras and things like that. And so you need to make sure that the buyer is aware that you are going to take that with you, that it's not going to be conveyed with the sale. So those are called exclusions, and those exclusions will be listed in paragraph 2D. And then as the listing agent, you can mention those in the MLS listing when you put it on MLS. There is a place on the MLS for exclusions, and you can list them there. I usually not only list them in the exclusions on MLS, I also mention them in the agent remarks, because sometimes the buyer doesn't read the exclusions. They don't know what that means. So, and sometimes the other agent doesn't read it either. So I put it in the agent remarks as well, so that they can't say, well, I didn't even see that. Yeah, you know what? I put it in the exclusions and I put it in the agent remarks. If you didn't see that, that's on you. Okay, so let's move on to the next page, paragraph 2E. This is if the property is located in a homeowners association where you're mandatory membership, then you do need to check that it is. If it's not in an HOA neighborhood, then you can check is not. Now, there are some neighborhoods that have an HOA and the membership is voluntary. I have had a listing within the last year where that was the case. That is extremely rare, though. Usually, if there's an HOA, you have to be a member, and you do have to pay annual dues. And also, there are neighborhoods that have monthly dues. So that's another thing that you'll need to make sure you find out from your seller. Is it in an HOA? Is it mandatory? And what are the dues and how often do you have to pay them? Now, that is also disclosed in the seller's disclosure. You'd be surprised at how many sellers do not know what the name of their HOA is and what their fees are. So you need to make sure and verify that information. All right, paragraph 3, the list price. By this point, you should have toured the home and seen the overall condition of the home. Does it need repairs? Is it completely updated? Is it, how does it compare to other homes in the neighborhood? Is it better? Is it about the same? Or is it way worse? And then you've run the comps for the neighborhood, and then you've discussed all this with your seller, and you've arrived at this list price. So in this case, it is $389. Oh, sorry about that. This thing, there we go. Okay, paragraph 4, the term. Every contract has to have a beginning and an ending date. In this case, it begins on August 22nd, and then it ends on November 30th. There is no mandatory time period here of how long you have to list a property. You can list it for, 5 days or 5 months. Most agents list properties for 6 months. And it really depends on the market. If the market's hot and you're moving things, in 30 to 60 days, yeah, then you just take a 4-month listing. There's no reason to extend it forever. But you do have to have a beginning and an ending date. You cannot have an open-ended date. So, I'm going to list it on August 22nd and then leave the second part blank and say, well, we'll just decide when we're done. No, that's not legal. So put in, on my listings, I do 4-month listings. And if I can't sell it in 4 months, there's either something wrong with the property or the seller's just not cooperating and they won't reduce the price. Because if you can't move a house in 4 months, it's probably because it's overpriced or it needs a lot of repair. So we got to do something. If the seller's not going to do something, then I don't want to continue marketing this home. All right, paragraph 5, this is where the big changes came in because of the NAR lawsuit, where all those things that went into effect in August of 2024. This is where the changes in the contract came in. Now we've always, when we work for a client, we always expect to get paid, and nothing has changed there. Part of the lawsuit issue was that some sellers felt that they were being forced into paying for the buyer's agent, and they didn't want to do that. Now, there was no time where the sellers there was no mandatory buyer compensation, but they felt that it wasn't explained to them well enough. So now the new contract clearly explains that, hey, you don't have to pay the buyer's agent if you don't want to. And then there's, you can offer them this or nothing. So let's talk about that. Paragraph 5, paragraph 5A, if you're going to offer compensation to a buyer's agent, then you would put your amount in 5A 1A. So in this particular example, it's 5%. And let's say it wasn't a percentage, but a flat fee. You could put a flat fee here. And then you would also put in 5A2 what portion of that commission is going to go to a buyer's agent should they bring a qualified buyer that puts a contract on the house. So in this particular example, the buyer's agent is being offered 2.5%. So we're listing the home at 5% and we're offering 2.5% to the buyer's agent. So basically, it's the same thing we were doing before. Hey, I'm splitting my commission with you. I'm going to keep 2.5. You're going to get 2.5. Let's say you took a 6% listing. I'm going to keep 3. You're going to get 3. Whatever. You could take a 5% listing and only offer 1% to the buyer's agent. That's totally up to you and the seller. The seller needs to understand that when you don't offer compensation to the buyer's agent, it's possible that the buyer won't want to come see your house, because once the buyer realizes they've got to pay their own agent, that increases the cost of the home. And they may just say, you know what, I'm not interested in seeing this because it's going to cost me more money. So that's, but that's the way it is. And so you just need to make sure that everything is clear. Now, what if the seller says, I'm more than willing to pay you, a commission for listing and selling my house, but I do not want to pay the other agent. That's the buyer's problem. If they want to have an agent, they need to pay them. Okay, well then we go to 5B. Paragraph 5B says broker's fee without compensation for the other broker. So if I'm going to list your home and not offer compensation to the other agent, then what am I going to charge you? Am I still going to charge you 5%? I'm going to get all 5%, 6%, 3%, 1%. So that's up to you and your broker and what you put there. Most sellers that aren't willing to offer a commission to a buyer's agent are most likely not going to be willing to offer you, 6 or 5% either. They're probably going to want you to list it at 3 or 2%. So, but you need to discuss that with your broker and what their policies are there. So in this example, there it's NA because we had 5% up top. But let's say that this seller did not want to offer compensation to a buyer's agent, and in 5A it would have been all NAs. So we would have come down here and put, let's say, 3%. So we're going to list your home and sell it for 3%. Which is probably what I would have got anyway if there hadn't been a buyer's agent. Now, one caveat I do want to say here is just because the seller told me they didn't want to pay a buyer's agent up front, and the listing agreement doesn't have me paying or sharing any commission, doesn't mean that the seller can't change their mind later. Let's say we list the house and after 3 weeks, we've only had one showing. And then we keep getting feedback every time somebody tries to schedule an appointment. And then they find out that there's no compensation, and they say, well, they're interested, but because they have to pay their own agent, they're not going to show it. If that feedback keeps coming in, then the seller may change their mind. They might not, but the seller can always change their mind if they realize, hey, you know what, maybe I should offer some money here because people aren't looking at my house. There are different forms for that. The seller can offer compensation directly to the buyer's agent. They don't have to go through you as the listing agent. There's the compensation from the seller. There's the compensation between brokers. So those forms are listed on another video that I did earlier, and you can check that on my YouTube channel. All right, let's move on here. On page 3, the paragraphs 5, C, and D, they talk about how our commissions are earned and payable. You don't have to fill anything in here, so don't worry about that. You might want, you're going to want to read through this. Paragraph 5E1 talks about if there's a breach of contract, if the buyer breaches the contract and the seller sues them and gets money or damages, the broker is possibly entitled to some of that money. Look, I listed your home and marketed it and did all this work. I'm entitled to a commission. But if you cross that bridge, if that does happen, you're going to need to turn that over to your broker, and your broker is probably going to contact their attorney. And because this is a legal matter, it's going to court. And, unless you're an attorney, you're not going to be handling this part. But understand that the contract is basically saying, hey, you know what? If we do our job and the buyer backs out and you get money from them, we're going to want some of that money because we've done our part. Okay, paragraph 5E2 talks about how some brokers will get money from outside sources like referrals to service providers. Some companies own home warranty companies. Some will get referral fees for vendors like security companies that put in home security cameras, and or possibly a company that comes in to do fixing your house up, handyman type stuff, contractors. Any third party compensation that they get has nothing to do with the contract itself. and, doesn't get the seller. So, well, since you got that money, I can reduce what I'm paying you. No, you agreed to pay me this. What I'm getting from somebody else really doesn't have anything to do with you. Now, some of that stuff can get kind of borderline ethical. Personally, as a broker, I don't take any referral fees from anybody that I refer to a client. I just don't think it's a good thing to do. But there's in most cases it's legal. So if your broker allows you to do that, make sure you're following their policy. Paragraph 5E3. Other compensation here, in this example, it's an NA. But I have one time I had a client that moved out of state, and they were, very busy, didn't have time to deal with the property. They asked me to go ahead and handle all the lawn care. So I hired a company and I paid them. And then I was reimbursed by the seller. I trusted them. I knew they were going to pay me back. So those would be what we call reimbursable expenses. Now, you don't have to do that. Today, most, like a lawn crew, for example, most of them are going to accept Zelle or Venmo. So, but this was before we had all that, when I was doing it. Okay, paragraph 5F, the protection period. This is to protect you as the agent, the listing agent, in case the seller terminates or tries to go around you. Say, you know what, I don't want to sell my house now. And then you find out a week later that they are now talking to one of the buyers that you showed the house to, and they end up selling the house to that buyer. And the only reason they told you they didn't want to sell it anymore is so they didn't have to pay you commission. So the protection period basically prevents that from happening. Even if this agreement is terminated or expires, you still are protected if they try to sell it to somebody that you showed the house to. And so this example is for 30 days. So if they tried to sell it to somebody within 30 days of this agreement ending, they would still owe me a commission. And you could put more than 30 days. You could put 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. Now personally, I'm not going to put more than 30 days, only because I would have to keep following up and seeing if they've sold the house to somebody. And I just don't have time to keep checking on somebody that, I don't have a contract with anymore. But that's between you and your broker. If you want to follow somebody for 120 days after your listing ends, that's up to you. Also, if the seller relists the home with a different brokerage, then the protection period is no longer valid. All right, paragraph 5G, you do have to put the county that the property is located in. In this case, it's Harris County. I do have a current listing that's on the border with Harris and Galveston counties. And technically the title companies are close. There's two title companies within like 2 miles, but they're in Harris County, but the property itself is in Galveston County. Just because the property is in one county doesn't mean you have to close in that county. So if it's a borderline county, you might want to say Harris and Galveston, or Brazoria and Fort Bend. So just make sure that you're putting something that's where the property is located. Okay, paragraph 6, the listing services. If I'm going to list the property and you're listing it with me, the reason you're hiring me is not only because of my knowledge and expertise, but it's because I'm a licensed realtor and I have access to the multiple listing service, which is, and you don't, as a general member of the public. So the MLS is the big value that we bring as realtors to selling people's homes. So paragraph 6 gives me, it authorizes me to put all the photos and information and upload it into the MLS. The MLS that I'm a member of is HAR, Houston Association of Realtors. So when I take a listing, I get all that information and upload it, and that home then goes and spreads out to Zillow, Redfin, Remax, Yahoo Real Estate, just hundreds and hundreds of websites. But it all started with my local MLS. And that's what I'm getting paid for, to market and advertise their home. It's possible that a client won't want you to list it on the MLS. Those are very rare circumstances where somebody doesn't want it on the MLS. I'm going to discuss that a little bit later on. But if they don't want it on there, then you would check box 6A2 here. And it says seller instructs the buyer not to file this with an MLS. The problem is, once you have a listing agreement and you're a realtor, if you start marketing that home, you have to put it on the MLS. Otherwise, it's a violation of the realtor rules. So it could be an issue. If I have somebody that doesn't want that, we'll discuss that one-on-one, and we'll figure out how we're going to handle it. Okay. Let's see here. This also mentions that all the photos and information and descriptions that I use to market and sell your property and put it on the apps, those all are my personal property. They don't belong to you as the seller. So if you terminate the agreement, you cannot use my photos, you cannot use my descriptions or any of the work that I've done, my virtual tour. Those are all my personal property. All right, down to paragraph 7. This just tells the seller, hey, you know what? People are going to be coming into your home. You need to be aware of these things. So the seller understands that not only will buyers be coming in, but other agents, and they're probably going to have access to the property as well, using lock boxes or things like that. Paragraph 7B, showing companies, scheduling companies. Most brokerages are going to use either Showing Smart, which is, well, here in the Houston area. In the Houston area, Showing Smart is the big showing service. It's owned by HAR, and it's a free service. So when I put the listing in, all the other agents can schedule all the showings through Showing Smart, and it's free to them and it's free to me, and provides feedback. It's very, very similar to a much more well-known system called Showing Time. Showing Time has been around for many years. It's nationwide, and a lot of brokerages use them, a lot of agents use them. But Showing Time charges now, and Showing Time is owned by Zillow, which a lot of agents don't like. But if you're using Showing Time or Showing Smart or some other showing service, you need to indicate that here on the listing agreement so that your seller understands, hey, I'm going to be using a showing service. People aren't going to be calling me to schedule an appointment to see your house. The showing service will contact you and let you know who's showing your house and when. So these are great services because they offer online scheduling, and you can see who's showing your house and when. It texts the seller and lets them know who's coming and when they're coming. The seller can approve it by just clicking yes on their phone. So it's a great service. Some brokerages have an in-house scheduling service. They pay somebody to answer the phone, not 24/7, but during business hours, and schedule appointments. But personally, I prefer Showing Smart because it's free and it does everything for me and creates, a record of everybody who showed it, and also allows those agents to provide feedback instantly. All right. Paragraph 7C talks about a key box, which is more commonly called a lock box. Is the agent going to is the seller going to allow me to put a lock box on the house? In most cases, yes, because if I can't put a lock box on the house, how are other agents going to get in there? I'm not going to drive over there every day with a key. So, 95% of the time, this is going to be yes, the broker is authorized to put a lockbox on there. Every once in a while, the seller will say, no, I do not want that, and that's going to be on the next page. But sellers will sometimes say, I don't want people coming into my home, particularly like elderly people, and they don't really leave the house anyway. So they'll say, well, I'm going to be here. Okay. If they're going to be there 24/7, then you don't need to put a lockbox on there if they don't want it, because they're gonna be there and let the people in. My suggestion when you have that, if you have a seller that always wants to be home when people are looking at their home, please advise them to stay out of the way. Don't be a tour guide. Don't try to, walk them through the house and explain everything. That's what their agent is there for. They don't want you to give them a tour, because then they feel awkward and they can't talk to their agent about the things they like and don't like, because you're there listening to everything. That's a good way to turn people off and have them not buy your house. So if you are a seller that wants to be there for every showing, please go in the backyard or go walk your dog or something. Just get out of the way, and don't be a tour guide. Also, another reason why some people don't want to put a lockbox on there, it could be a really expensive home. Like in the Houston area, we have River Oaks. You're probably not going to put a lockbox on someone that has a $6 million home, and just let anybody in there. So those are extreme circumstances. Also, if it's a celebrity, I remember when JJ Watt lived in Pearland, if he's going to sell his house, you can't just put a lockbox on there and let anybody go into his house. He's a celebrity. People are going to go there not because they want to buy the house, they just want to go, and man, I went in JJ Watt's house. So you have to be, in those kind of extreme circumstances, those are, different exceptions. And in that case, in some cases, very expensive homes and things like that, you'll have what's called an accompanied appointment, in where the listing agent is required to be there at all showings. So the listing agent is the only one who has a key, and they will open the door personally, and they will be there while the people are touring the home. And the people can be, filtered out. I mean, say, I can't let you see this house until I see your loan pre-approval letter or proof of funds. That is allowable. Also, when you are going to put a lockbox on a property, make sure that your seller understands what that means. They can still get in with their key, but there will be a lockbox on the house. I strongly recommend that if you're going to put a lockbox on a house, that you use only a Supra iBox, so that only licensed realtors, inspectors, and appraisers can access those boxes. I don't like people that put combos on occupied homes. If you put a combination lockbox on somebody's home and they're living in it, there are agents who, for whatever reason, will give out the combination to their clients, because they don't want to go show the house. And that's just, not only unethical, but borderline illegal. And now this buyer goes back and, visits the home without the agent. And they have no business being in somebody's home without an agent present. So I strongly recommend that you do not put combination lock boxes on occupied homes. And, whether, if it's not a super, then whatever lockbox you use in your area. Okay, moving on. Paragraph 8, you'll see there's nothing here. It just says reserved. Most likely, Texas Realtors put that there because they know that we're probably going to end up having some more changes once all this fallout comes around from the NAR lawsuit. So this is probably going to be for them to add a new paragraph that covers something that they didn't think about. So right now, paragraph 8 doesn't mean anything. It's just there. But in the future, there probably will be something there once they realize they need, oh, we forgot, we should have put this in there. Okay, paragraph 9, intermediary. In Texas, we do not recognize dual agency. It's not legal. You cannot represent the buyer and the seller at the same time in the transaction. However, we do have intermediary, which does allow you to represent both, but not at the same capacity. So in Texas, if you do represent the buyer and the seller in the same transaction, they both must sign an intermediary notification form, which indicates that they are both okay with the same broker representing them in the same transaction. And if they both don't agree, then you cannot do it. You'll have to send, usually you send the buyer to a different brokerage. You can still refer it out and get a referral fee. Now, what some agents don't understand is, well, they think that intermediary means that you personally represent the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. That's not what intermediary means. Now that would be intermediary, but normally what happens is, because you need to remember that the listing that you have is not really your listing, it's your broker's listing. And if you have a buyer, it's not really your buyer, it's the broker's buyer, because anything you do as an agent is under control of your broker. And your broker actually owns all the buyers and sellers as far as the contracts. So let's say that you personally have a listing at a property and another agent in your same office represents a buyer that now wants to buy the house that you have listed. That is intermediary, because the same broker represents the seller and the buyer in the same transaction. That is intermediary. And if you're not filling out that form in that situation, you're going to find yourself in some big trouble, legal trouble. So make sure that when you do that, you are filling out those forms. The buyer and the seller understand that the broker represents both parties and that they have both agreed. Now, normally what happens is, and most brokers are going to do intermediary with appointments, and they're going to appoint the agent that had the listing to the seller, and they're going to appoint the other agent that had the buyer to the buyer. So nothing will really change, but the broker will be the intermediary, and they will instruct the agents not to discuss any, pertinent facts that could, jeopardize either party. But each party has to be treated fairly and equally, and that's sometimes hard to do when you represent both sides. So the agents have to be very careful not to, share too much information with each other. They need to represent their clients and only their clients. All right. Let's say that the seller says, you know what, I don't like that idea. I don't want you representing the buyer on my house. And then they could check paragraph 9B, which says, I'm not gonna authorize this. So I know up front, before anybody's even looked at your house yet, I already know up front that you do not want me to show it, or anybody from my brokerage, you don't want any of us to show your listing. It's gonna have to be somebody from an outside agency. Now, I will tell you this, that most sellers don't check that. Most sellers just say, I want you to sell my house, do what you got to do. And so they're going to check 9A. Okay, paragraph 10, confidential information. Remember that when you represent someone, they are a client, they get old car, the obedience, loyalty, disclosure, blah, blah, blah. They're a client. Their needs come ahead of yours, and that includes confidentiality. Confidentiality means you don't share confidential information. That doesn't mean you don't disclose that the house flooded. That's a pertinent fact about the property, but you don't tell somebody that they're getting divorced or, why they're selling or whatever. And that survives the deal and the contract. You basically, it's like attorney-client privilege. You can't reveal that information forever. All right, let's move on. Paragraph 11B. Again, if the seller doesn't want you to put it on the listing on the internet, or they don't want pictures on the internet or their address, those are all options. And again, like I mentioned to you before, it could be because they're a celebrity, or it could be some safety reason. Maybe somebody has a stalker and they don't want the photos of their house on there. I mean, you never know what the situation is with somebody. So if there's a reason they want one of these, you need to make sure that you address that situation. If you're not sure what to do, go to your broker. They'll advise you how to handle that. There are forms with HAR where you can say, I'm not going to submit photos, but you have to have the form. You can't just say, you know what, I don't feel like putting photos up. All right, paragraph 11C, this is where you're going to check the boxes on what type of payment is acceptable, financing. Pretty much always the first four are going to be checked. conventional loans, VA loans, FHA, and cash. Well, cash is always going to be checked. Nobody says no to cash. But most people don't use cash to buy a house. I wish they did. But cash and conventional will always be checked. VA and FHA, most of the time, it is possible that you won't check VA and FHA if the home is in like really bad condition. If it's like an investor only type deal where the home is in such bad condition, there's no way it's going to pass an inspection. Then there's no point in checking VA or FHA because the appraiser will come out and there will be mandatory lender required repairs, and we're not going to get there. So in that case, you can always put cash or just cash or cash conventional, because investors can still use conventional loans. Remember that if it's an investor, they cannot use a VA or an FHA loan. Okay, moving on to paragraphs 11D and E. You can read through these. This just tells you what you're allowed to do as the broker or the listing agent and what you're not allowed to do. Basically, you're allowed to market and sell the house. You're not allowed to make decisions for them. You're not allowed to sign documents on their behalf, that type of stuff. All right, paragraph 11F. This one is new. It allows the seller to control what the listing broker is allowed to share. So let's say that the seller has agreed to offer a 2.5% commission, but they don't really want to pay that. They could tell you, well, I don't want you to tell them how much I'm willing to pay. You can just tell them that I'm offering a commission, but I don't want you to disclose the amount. And so the buyer's agent may only request 1% or 2%, or some other amount. Or if they're not offering a commission, they could say, look, I don't want to tell them up front what I'm willing to offer. I want to wait and see what their offer is to see whether or not I want to pay them. But remember in paragraph 5, we talked about whether or not they were going to offer a commission or not. And let's say that they don't offer a commission. We chose 5B. Here's where this could come into play in 11F. Let's say that they are not offering a commission up front. So I tell the agent, yeah, they're not offering a commission, but it doesn't stop you from asking for one. And the buyer can always ask, the buyer's agent can always ask the seller, even though they're not offering one. So they submit that form asking the seller to pay the commission. The seller could go, oh, well, this is a pretty good deal. This is what I want. Yes, I am willing to pay a commission now. But they don't want you as the listing agent to tell them an amount because it's negotiable. This is all part of that lawsuit stuff that the seller wants to have more say in the game and be able to negotiate more. If you're not really clear on this part, talk to your broker and they can go over it with you and train you on this. Okay, moving on, paragraph 12, more disclosures and stuff about what the home has and doesn't have, what should be disclosed or not disclosed. Paragraph 13, additional promises from the seller. They need to understand that they need to cooperate with me. When I had a seller one time where the showing service made I want to say over a 2-week period that we had over 20 requests for showings. They only approved one of them. That's not cooperation. I can't sell your house if you won't ever let anybody see it. And the reason is because this client had 2 dogs and they didn't want to kennel them during the day. So they wanted the dogs to just be able to roam the house. But they were very big dogs and they weren't real friendly. So they couldn't really let people in the house when the dogs were out. Well, the dogs were always out. So I eventually terminated that listing because the seller wasn't cooperating. Paragraph 14 notifies the seller that the listing broker is not responsible for the contents of the home or for injuries. This reminds the seller, hey, there's going to be people in your house. You don't know them. make sure that your home is safe. Don't leave your gun laying around. Don't leave things that people could trip over and injure themselves. Make sure that the stairs are sturdy and are not rotten and somebody's going to fall in them. Make sure that there's a notification on the back door. There's a dog out there or somebody could get hurt. So you're responsible as the homeowner for anything that happens to somebody at your home. Paragraph 15, special provisions. I always hate this section because everybody goes, oh, look at all that space. What should I put there? Well, nothing is what you should put there. And you'll see NA listed here on the example. It's just because there's a space there doesn't mean you're supposed to write something there. It's very rare that you need to put anything in special provisions. Very rare. The only time you would add something if it's a pertinent fact, a business fact that applies to this specific listing, and it's not somewhere already in the listing agreement and there's no addendum for it. But what I usually find is that agents will put stuff here and there was already a place for it in the listing agreement. They just didn't know it. Or there was an addendum for it and they just didn't know there was an addendum for it. And then the example I give here is that you should not write that the seller is keeping the chandelier in the dining room here. And the reason you shouldn't put it in special provisions is because that is already discussed in paragraph 2D, the exclusions. So if you've already put it in paragraph 2D, why are you putting it in paragraph 15? And if you're putting it in paragraph 15, it probably means that you didn't put it in paragraph 2 where it belonged. So it tells me that you don't understand the contract that you're writing. All right, paragraph 16. This mentions that this is a legally binding contract between the seller and yourself, and that if they breach the contract, that you can sue them for your commission. Also, if you breach the contract, they could sue you or your broker. Paragraph 17 talks about mediation. In Texas, mediation is mandatory by each contract. It means that we'll agree to go to a mediator if there's a dispute before we try to sue each other. Usually the mediator can tell you, hey, if you go to court, here's what's going to happen because you are wrong and you are right. Attorney fees in Texas, if you sue somebody over a real estate deal, you better be right because if you lose, you end up paying their legal fees and attorney fees. Paragraph 19, what addenda are going to be required for this specific listing? So if this home is an older home, it was built in 1972, well, I know I'm going to need a lead-based paint addendum. So I would check 19C. So you're always going to check 19A because you always have to have an IABS. And in 99% of the time, you're going to check 19B because a seller's disclosure is going to be required. There are only a few exceptions on when you don't need a seller's disclosure. I've covered that in a different video. But if this particular property, you can see that 19E is checked, that it is in a water district. So I would need the water disclosure from that water district included because I have to disclose that it's in a water district. So only include the things that this property needs that apply to this property. I had one agent that checked every box and put a bunch of disclosures on there, and 90% of them didn't apply to that property. I mean, that home was built in like 2000, and she had a lead-based paint addendum in there. I'm like, what are you doing? All right, paragraph 20 is just more legal disclosures. You can read through that. Paragraph 21, more legal disclosures, but these are big ones that you really need to be aware of and tell the seller, because I've had sellers want me to violate 21A, fair housing. I have had sellers who literally told me, I don't want you to show my house to any of those people. And you can fill in the blank. Well, that was the end of the listing appointment. I'm not going to break the law for anybody. Plus, that's just stupid. Let's see, 19B, 21B. About getting their payoff amount on their mortgage. I need to know whether your mortgage is paid off or whether you still have a mortgage, because that's going to make a difference on, how, if you've only been in this house a year, you could possibly be upside down on your loan. And you're gonna have to bring money to closing. I need to know that up front, and they need to know it too. Also, it advises them to review the information in MLS. Usually when I type everything in and get all the photos loaded and everything, I immediately text my client and say, all right, it's up. Please check everything out first. And so they usually see it before anybody else sees it. And if there's a misspelling or they didn't like the way I worded the description or something, they'll tell me. And so we can fix it right away before anybody really sees it. 21D, yeah, this is a big one. Put anything valuable away. Don't leave your Rolex sitting out on your nightstand, and don't leave a loaded gun, out where people are going to be in your house. Sometimes people bring kids. Some kid sees that gun, they don't know it's a real gun and it's loaded. Very dangerous. If you have prescription drugs, you might want to, kind of hide them. There was a case where this mother and daughter were going to open houses, and one of them would distract the agent while the other one went into the bathroom and cleaned out all the good drugs. And they were doing it, for several weeks before they finally got caught. Surveillance equipment. A lot of sellers will have cameras in their home and they're recording the clients. There's laws on that. You got to be very careful. If you are videotaping your clients while they're touring the homes, please do not call me and tell me what their conversation was about. I don't want to get involved in some lawsuit. If they told you that they love the house or whatever, that's great. Just say, hey, I think these people are interested. Do not show me the video. Also make sure that if the seller had any changes to the property or additions, that they got the proper permits. Because if they don't have the proper permits, it could be a problem once the inspector comes out or the appraiser comes out. Also, paragraph 21G, make sure that if the home was built prior to 1978, there's a lead-based paint addendum. Paragraph 21H, if the seller is a foreign person and they own the property, there are specific IRS codes that address that. I'm not, I don't work for the IRS, but I do need to make sure that this seller understands, hey, you're going to get an extra tax because you are a foreigner selling property in the United States. Also, I tell the clients, be sure to not respond to emails that asking, hey, wire your money here, whatever. There's a lot of scammers out there that once your home's for sale, they'll pretend to be the title company, or somehow they find out what title company you're using, and then they'll clone all their information and make it look like it's an email from them, but it's not. So I always tell my clients, make sure that you only use wiring instructions that came directly from the title company, and this person, call this person at this number and only use their instructions. Okay, and then finally, you're going to need signatures, and make sure that you sign it. You are usually allowed to sign on your broker's behalf. Most brokers don't want to sign every document. So here you can put broker associate, and you are the associate, and so you're going to sign here, Angela agent, put your license number, and then the sellers will sign here as well. All right, so that's going to do it. Let me stop sharing here. So I appreciate you joining me, and continue to watch my YouTube channel. I'll add new video tutorials as they come along. Thanks for joining in.